Our lecture today deals with balance. And this is a term that we hear throughout our life. It's something that we want to attain. We need to develop a balance between work and home life. We want to have a balance in our diet. And here in art, it's the same thing. We want to have a balanced composition. And our end result wants to look something like this seesaw here. All forms of art are going to deal with balance. Balance is how the weight is distributed in an artwork. In three-dimensional art, such as sculpture and architecture, ceramics, we're dealing with actual or physical weight. However, in two-dimensional artworks, we deal with visual weight, the lightness or heaviness of shapes and objects, but we also consider visual interest as being very important. There's going to be four types of balance we deal with: symmetrical, asymmetrical, radial, and crystallographic. In the rare instance where the work is not balanced, we say it is imbalanced. So we're going to start off with symmetrical balance. And here we have a precise correspondence of like elements on either side of a central axis. What does this mean? Well, think about drawing a line down the center of an artwork. Don't do it physically. Just imagine a line going down the center of an artwork. Does the left side and the right side look alike? If the answer is yes, then it's symmetrical balance. Symmetrical balance is also unique because it is the only form of balance that has subcategories. We have absolute symmetry and bilateral symmetry. In the case of absolute symmetry, each side of the composition is exactly the same, like 100%. They're mirror images of one another. Absolute symmetry, though, really isn't that common. In fact, it's beyond rare. Where we do see it in art tends to be in architecture. This is the Imperial Hotel, and actually a reconstruction of it. It was a building built by Frank Lloyd Wright in Japan in the early part of the 20th century. And if we were to imagine a line down the center of this building, we can say absolutely that the left side and the right side are exactly the same. They're mirror images of one another, and this would be absolute symmetry. The same could be said for this mountainside in this poster. The left side and right side are truly mirror images of one another. And we also have the phrase "step on no pets" on top of it. This is a palindrome, meaning that it reads the same from left to right as it does from right to left. So it again causes us to focus in on the symmetry of this artwork. It's very much like one of those psychological Rorschach tests. But what we tend to see in painting and in sculpture and in other art forms is bilateral symmetry. Bilateral symmetry is something where the composition looks really similar, left side to right side, but we do have some discrepancies between the two. However, the discrepancies would tend to be pretty minor. My example of bilateral symmetry is going to be The Last Supper by Domenico Ghirlandaio. And of course, the first thing we really need to do is decide whether this work is in symmetrical balance or not. So when we look at this painting, we imagine a line down the center of the work, and we ask ourselves if the left side and the right side match up, if there is a correspondence of like elements. And I know there is a lot of extra material in this painting. It's crowded with people, plants, and wildlife. If you can imagine that all being gone and just concentrating on the architecture, that's really the best hint or the best key in determining whether something is in symmetrical balance or not. We have the arches in the background, we have windows on either side, and even basically the booth that the apostles are sitting in is wrapped around in such a way that we can say absolutely the left side and the right side match up, and they match up almost perfectly. But then when we think about all the other elements that is in this painting, the fruit trees in the background, and when we look at the left image compared to the right image of the arch, we have like even a palm tree over off to the right. The sides do not totally match up. In fact, even in the far windows, at the right we have a peacock, and the left we have kind of more of a dove-shaped bird. At the very base of the booth, at the far left, we see a couple of jars. At the right-hand side, it's a larger kind of cylinder type of object. So in this painting, the left side and the right side do match up. However, they are not exact. So this is bilateral symmetry. Another work that contains this is the Coronation of the Virgin by Enguerrand Quarton, who was a French artist during the Renaissance. Up above, we have the coronation of Mary being crowned Queen of Heaven. Below that, the crucifixion, and below that, the Last Judgment. The left side and the right side look an awful lot alike. We have the angels up above, but the angels do have a different wing pattern. We have different saints and apostles up above, and then the cities to the left and to the right of the crucifix, Rome and Jerusalem. Yes, they're both cities. They have fortification walls around them. However, they have different buildings within them. And then down below at the Last Judgment, we have the saved at the left and we have the damned at the right. So even though this painting is very similar on either side, and we would say absolutely it's symmetrical, if we go further on and say, is it absolute or bilateral symmetry? It's bilateral symmetry because the left side and the right side are not 100% equal to one another. And just a little side note, because the artist is French, the cities of Rome and Jerusalem there on either side of the crucifix, they're really French cities of Avignon and Villeneuve because the artist hadn't traveled outside of France. So for the artist, symmetrical balance is the simplest type of balance to create. And it's also the simplest to identify. As a hint, I will tell you most all religious works would be in symmetrical balance. I can only think of one off the top of my head where it's a different type of balance. You might want to think of symmetrical balance as being very rigid or very formal, because as an artist, whatever I create on one side of the artwork has to transfer to the other side as well. Some adjectives we would use to describe works in symmetrical balance: strength, stability, permanence, something that is calm, something that is dignified. Think of how those adjectives play out to a building such as the White House or any government building. Again, religious paintings. We want to attach those adjectives: strength, stability, permanence, calm, dignified. We want those adjectives attached to these types of structures and paintings. So now let's move on to asymmetrical balance. And here, balance is attained by using dissimilar objects on either side of a central axis. Keep in mind that these objects must have equal visual weight or eye appeal. Asymmetrical balance would be considered informal or casual in terms of attaining balance. This is my favorite type of art to create as an artist because the left side and the right side, they don't have to look at all alike. And there are at least a dozen different ways of creating asymmetrical balance. How many ways do we have of creating symmetrical balance? Only one. That's why it's formal. Here, it's informal. And when we look at this chart here, in the upper right-hand corner, above the letter B, we have a heavier object balanced out by two smaller objects. So equal visual weight, equal eye appeal. That's what we're going for. So now let's take a look at Boston Common at Twilight. It should be a familiar painting to you. We've talked about it in terms of it being representational art, art that looks like the real world, and we've also talked about it in terms of the way that space is created, through one-point perspective. And this is one of the keys of figuring out how artwork is balanced. When we looked at paintings such as The Last Supper, where the vanishing point was in the center, and I refer to that as frontal recession. When the vanishing point is in the center like that, the left side and the right side can match up equally. They're symmetrical. Here, we found out that the vanishing point is in diagonal recession, meaning that it's not in the center, it's off to the left here. There is no way for us to create a symmetrical work with the vanishing point not in the center. So automatically we know that this work is asymmetrical. We can also figure that out just by looking at the artwork. Off to the left, we have a very heavy, almost industrial-like scene. We have tall buildings, we have trolleys and carriages, we have a street, a sidewalk, and people. But then the other side of the painting is a little bit wider, it's much more open, and it's more of a landscape scene where we have trees, birds, snow, a few individuals walking in the distance. Here, the left side and the right side, they don't look at all alike. They don't match up in any way, yet they balance one another out. That smaller, more urban scene balances out the wider, more rural scene. And again, I know I'm pretty heavy on examples using paintings, but these terms can apply to other forms of media, such as sculpture. Here we have an asymmetrical sculpture. We have kind of a heavy side in the bottom lower left, and that balances out the upper far right. And now we're going to move on to radial balance. Radial balance is probably the easiest to identify because it's circular. The form radiates outward from a central point. Think about how the sun emanates rays. It is a form that we see more commonly in nature than we ever find in art. But we do have a couple locations where it is prominent. Think about ceramics. When we look down into pottery, that's radial balance. Also, in this case, we're looking up at the dome at St. Peter's Cathedral, which happened to be designed by Michelangelo. And this is a massive space. You could fit a football field in the inside standing on end, and it will not hit the top of the central dome. In the lower part of this image, we can even see the top of the baldacchino, which is 100 foot tall, that marks the grave of St. Peter. But with radial balance, we can see that everything is emanating from that central point on the dome. Also true of radial balance would be this rose window. Our final form of balance is crystallographic balance, and sometimes this is called AllOver Pattern. Here we have the constant repetition of the same element or the same quality everywhere along the surface. And so this is what I mean by AllOver Pattern. This wonderful quilt shows that repetition of this design throughout its entire surface. If we needed to enlarge this quilt, we automatically know the design that we're going to be creating. And the same can be said for this quilt here. This is Signature Quilt, and it was created in the mid-1800s. Each of these cubes has different designs, different fabric on the sides, and the top of the cube is open for a signature. The most famous person to sign this work, and he signed it before he was famous, was Abraham Lincoln. So let's review for a moment. Each of the following images you're going to see are going to fall into one of our 4 categories of balance that we've covered. And remember, these 4 categories are real simple to remember. Symmetrical balance. Do the sides of the painting or artwork look the same? If yes, it's symmetrical balance. Asymmetrical balance. Here's where the two different sides of the paintings don't look alike. Radial balance is going to be circular. And crystallographic, all over pattern. So as I scroll through the next few images, all you have to do is yell out whether it's symmetrical, asymmetrical, radial, or crystallographic balance. Unless you're in the library, don't yell it out then, but just think it really loudly in your head. Radial balance. Religious work, left and right side look alike, symmetrical balance. All over pattern, crystallographic balance, and in mathematics we would call this a tessellation. The only time 2 balances out 3 is in asymmetrical balance. The Taj Mahal is probably one of the buildings that is the most symmetrically balanced of all. This work throws a lot of students. Start eliminating the possibilities. Is it all over pattern? No, so crystallographic is off the board. Is it radial balance? No, it's not round at all. Is it symmetrical balance? A line down the center, left side and right side, do they look alike? No. So the only option left is asymmetrical balance. One of my favorite paintings. Nothing on the left matches anything on the right. Asymmetrical balance. Radial balance. Symmetrical balance, and in this case it's absolute symmetry. The left side and right side are exactly the same. This is an example of crystallographic balance, all over pattern. This is a hallway in the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Asymmetrical balance. And radial balance. So, our last term we need to know about is imbalance. And when a work of art isn't balanced, it then is imbalanced. Most of the time, this is done on purpose. It's used by an artist whose intentions are to shock viewers or to play into our discomfort. And a great idea or a great example of imbalance are these two trees. Which one would you feel more comfortable having a picnic underneath? And of course, it's going to be the one at the left. We're not even going to worry about the tree falling on us. It's not going to even enter our mind. But that tree at the right is about to fall at any moment. It is imbalanced, and we would be tense and uneasy the entire time we were sitting underneath it. And that's what imbalance does in art. Probably the only imbalanced work I'm going to show you the entire semester in an intro to art class is this photograph here, Death of a Loyalist Soldier by Robert Capa. This is an artist who worked during the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1937, and we are seeing a soldier just as he is being shot and killed. Most likely he's already dead even before he hits the ground. The work itself is off. It is imbalanced. We have the figure off to the left. There is nothing at all of any visual interest off to the right or of any significant visual weight. The artist could very easily have cropped this photograph to where this figure would be in the center of the work. It would be a balanced photograph then. However, it would not be as dramatic or as meaningful as it is here. The imbalance of the victim captures also the imbalance of the photograph. And it's a really, unfortunate for the scene, but it's a really wonderful composition by this artist. And as I mentioned before, the idea of imbalance plays into our discomfort. It makes us tense, it makes us uneasy. This is a scene from the movie Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock, and this is Marion Crane. we can see, just like in Death of a Loyalist Soldier, we have a figure off to the left, nothing balancing off to the right. This frame is imbalanced. The next frame we see Anthony Perkins off to the right, nothing off to the left in his frame. What happens after this conversation between these two individuals is she gets up, goes into her cabin, and we have one of the most startling scenes of film history with the shower scene. So this is used a lot in horror, this idea of imbalance. And with that, this ends our presentation on balance.